There's a room on the second floor of a mansion on Astor Street in Chicago that nobody's been allowed to enter for 3 years. The staff walk past that door with their eyes down. Nobody asks why. In a house owned by Elias Sarno, you don't ask why. He's 34. And when he walks into a room in this city, conversations end mid-sentence. He's never had to raise his voice. Not once. But on a Tuesday afternoon in October, he came home 2 hours early, and something coming through that forbidden door stopped him cold in his own hallway. Laughter. He hadn't heard that sound in this house in 3 years. He pushed the door open. Inside, a woman was dancing. Her name was Marisol Reyes, 27, one of the cleaning staff, 3 weeks past her probation. Her apron was still wet from mopping the 3rd floor. Her left knee was wrapped in a bandage washed so many times it had gone gray. Her canvas shoes were split open at the toe. She was dancing badly, out of breath, dragging that bad leg behind her, holding a mop handle like it was a dance partner. And in the wheelchair in front of her, a young woman was laughing so hard she was crying, both hands gripping armrests she'd worn the paint off of. Behind Elias, 2 of his men stopped in the doorway. One of them put a hand on the frame and waited for the nod. That's all it would have taken. One nod, and that woman would have been walked out the service entrance and off the property, and nobody in that house would have said her name again. The housekeeper went white. The young woman in the wheelchair stopped laughing. Marisol Reyes turned around, still holding the mop, and looked straight at the most powerful man in Chicago, standing in a doorway she'd been told never to open. What he did next, nobody in that room saw coming, and nobody in that room was ready for what it would cost him. If stories like this one move you, do us a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find us. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming. Now, let's go back to that sunroom in Chicago and find out what happened next. No one in that room moved. Elias Sarno walked in, and the sound of his shoes against the oak floor was the only sound left in the house. He passed Marisol as though she were a pillar, set the ring of keys on top of the piano covered in white cloth, then pulled a chair away from the wall. The man at the door still had one hand resting on the frame, still waiting. Elias didn't look at him. He looked at the chair he had just pulled out, pushed it aside, and sat down on the floor. He sat there on the wooden floor in a suit that cost more than a full year's wages for the woman standing in front of him. His legs stretched out like a man who had walked too far. Mrs. Constance raised a hand to her mouth. In all her years serving this house, she had never seen him sit anywhere lower than someone else. Elias looked up at the maid holding the mop and spoke in the calm voice the entire city knew. Start again from the beginning. I came in late. I missed the best part. Marisol didn't move. She heard every word and understood every word, but her body wouldn't obey. Her hands tightened around the mop handle until her knuckles turned white, and she felt her left knee begin to tremble, not from pain, but from something else. She had lived long enough at the bottom of this city to know that when a powerful man told you to do something, the question was never whether you would do it. The question was what you would lose after you did. I'm sorry, sir, she said. Her voice was so quiet that even she found it strange. I'm not allowed in this room. I know. I'll leave. I didn't tell you to leave. Yes, sir. I told you to dance. She lifted one hand. It trembled. She lowered it, tried again, and it still trembled. The mop that only moments ago had been her dance partner was now nothing more than a mop in the hands of a maid standing in the middle of a room she had no right to enter. She looked down at her worn shoes, split open at the toes against the polished oak floor, and she understood that she couldn't do it. Not today. Not in front of him. That was when the girl in the wheelchair spoke. Get out. Elias turned his head. Everyone in the room turned with him. Giada Sarno was sitting straighter than before, both hands still gripping the peeling armrests, and she looked at her brother with the eyes of someone who hadn't bothered to truly look at anyone for 3 years. You ruined it, she said. She can't dance with you sitting there. Get out. No one breathed. The man at the door took his hand off the frame. In this house, people didn't speak to Elias Sarno in that tone. They didn't speak to him in any tone he hadn't allowed. He looked at his sister for a long time. And in that silence, Marisol realized she was witnessing something she was never meant to see. Then Elias planted one hand against the floor, stood, brushed down the front of his coat, and picked up the ring of keys from the piano. All right, he said, just 2 words. Then he walked out, and the door closed behind him. In the hallway, 2 of his men were waiting. Mrs. Constance followed, her hands clasped tightly together. The man who had been holding the doorframe cleared his throat. Sir, she violated the rules. I'll have someone escort her out through the back gate right now. No. Yes, sir. From now on, No one stops her from entering that room. Mrs. Constance looked up. She had worked in this house since before Elias was grown, and she was the only person in that hallway who dared to speak. "Sir, forgive me. Did you just say?" "You heard me." "Yes, but you said no one was allowed. That was your own order. For 3 years I know what I said." "Mrs." Constance fell silent. Elias still didn't turn to look at the door. He stood there with the keys in his hand, and from inside the room, very softly, the sound of laughter began again. He heard it. No one said another word. Then he walked down the stairs without asking the woman's name. The last bus dropped Marisol at the corner 2 blocks from the rooming house, and she walked the rest of the way more slowly than usual, because after today's shift, her left knee had stopped wanting to cooperate. She climbed to the 3rd floor with one hand on the railing, one breath for every step. The room she rented was barely large enough for a bed, a hot plate, and a wardrobe, and the best thing anyone could say about it was that the door had a lock. She sat on the edge of the bed, removed the bandage, and looked at the knee that had been swelling since afternoon. In the freezer of the shared refrigerator out in the hallway was a bag of ice she kept specifically for this. She laid it over the knee and sat still, waiting for the sharp ache to pass. On the wall in front of her was a calendar, and one square had been circled in ballpoint pen, the day the debt collectors would call. She always circled it a week in advance, so she would never be caught by surprise. She pulled a cookie tin from beneath the bed and emptied the loose bills and coins onto the blanket. She counted twice because the first count was always wrong when she was tired. There wasn't enough. There had never been enough. But there was enough to send part of what she owed. And part was better than nothing. Because as long as she sent something every month, they still spoke to her in the voice people used with another human being. She divided the money into 3 piles on the blanket. The largest was for the debt. The second was for rent. The smallest was for food. And she looked at that smallest pile for a moment, then took several bills from it and moved them into the largest one, the way she did every month. The debt wasn't hers. That was the funniest thing about the whole situation, and she had stopped telling people about it a long time ago because she had realized that after hearing the story, they only nodded and still looked at her like someone who owed money. The man who had once been her husband had signed her name on papers she had never seen, then disappeared from the city, leaving behind a number and a ruined name in her records. She had knocked on the doors of several law offices, and people there had explained very kindly that proving the signature was forged would require more money than the debt itself, and they said it in the voice of people who had already said the same thing many times that week. She thanked them, walked out, and went looking for work cleaning floors. She wrapped the 3 piles of money in 3 separate pieces of paper and put them back into the tin. It wasn't until she stood to go to the sink that she saw it. A white envelope lay beneath the door, pushed in from the hallway. No sender's name, no recipient's name, nothing at all. It was lying there exactly as it had the month before, and the month before that, and she didn't even know when it had started, only vaguely remembered that it went back to some winter when she had been badly ill and missed several days of work. She picked it up. It was thick, as always. She had once stood in the hallway at midnight trying to catch whoever was slipping the envelopes beneath her door, and she had never caught anyone. She had asked the landlady once, and the woman had said she knew nothing about it, in a voice that told Marisol she knew something but considered it none of her business. Marisol believed it was the kindness of someone in the building, someone who had seen her dragging one leg up the stairs and decided to do something decent without wanting to be thanked. She was grateful to that person. She also had no intention of spending a single dollar from those envelopes. Her mother, who had cleaned hotel rooms until the day her body could no longer do it, had said one thing to her so many times that it had become part of the way Marisol carried herself through the world, that you can only keep yourself clean with what you earn yourself, and you leave the rest alone. Because anything people give you for nothing will eventually be collected in some other way. Her father had died when she was too young to remember whether he had ever taught her anything, so she listened to her mother. She pulled a shoebox from beneath the bed, placed the envelope inside with all the others, closed the lid, and pushed it back where it had been. Then she turned off the light, lay down, and in the darkness, she heard again the laughter of the girl in the wheelchair, and she smiled to herself, and she thought that perhaps tomorrow they would fire her. No one fired her. The next morning she came to work as usual, and no one said anything to her about the room on the 2nd floor. And it was that silence, more than anything else, that made the people working in the house begin to look at her differently. That evening, in the formal dining room, Elias Sarno received a guest. The guest was a construction contractor whose name appeared on the signs of 4 job sites across the city, and he sat down at the table wearing the expression of a man who had rehearsed in the car what he intended to say. Elias poured the wine himself. He asked about the man's oldest son, where he was spending his final year of school, and he remembered the name of the school correctly. He asked about the man's wife, who had recently undergone knee surgery, and he even remembered the name of the doctor who had operated on her. The contractor answered every question, and with each answer he seemed to sink a little deeper into his chair, because he understood that the man across from him had no need to remember those things, and the fact that he did meant he had been remembering them for a long time. The meal moved slowly. The main course was served and cleared, then dessert, and Elias still hadn't said a single word about money. It wasn't until the coffee cups were set down that he took a sheet of paper folded in half from inside his coat and placed it on the tablecloth beside his guest's plate, then pushed it across with 2 fingers. "You sign this," he said, "or on Monday you'll be sitting in your office wondering why there isn't a single truck in this city willing to deliver to your construction sites anymore." No one raised his voice. A server was still pouring more coffee at the far end of the table. The contractor looked at the paper for a while, then asked for a pen, and someone handed him one, and he signed. After that, he finished his coffee, thanked Elias for the meal, and left. And at the door, he even turned back to shake his hand. When the door closed, an older man who had been sitting at the far end of the table the entire time finally set down his napkin. Emmett Vance had the smile of the best insurance salesman in the neighborhood, and he was the only man in that house who sat down before Elias did. "You were too kind to him," Vance said. "Your father wouldn't have invited him to dinner. My father wouldn't have gotten the signature either." "That's true. Your father would have gotten it another way." Vance said it with a laugh, poured himself more wine, and moved on to the waste disposal contract on the west side. And it wasn't until he stood to leave that he added one more thing, as though it had only just occurred to him. "I heard the new maid got into Giada's room." Elias didn't answer. "I'm only mentioning it," Vance said. "People in the house are talking." 3 weeks earlier, Marisol Reyes had sat in a windowless room at the logistics warehouse by the river, where she had believed she was going for an interview for a cleaning job. They rolled each of her fingers across an ink card. They photographed her from 3 angles. They handed her a stack of confidentiality agreements, thicker than her apartment lease, and told her to sign where the tabs were marked, and she asked whether she was allowed to read them, and they told her to go ahead. They weren't in a hurry. She read every page. Afterward, a man carrying a thin file came in and read aloud everything they had found about her life. The debt in her name, the date her former landlord had asked her to leave her room, the name of the hospital where her mother had died, and she sat through all of it, without disputing a single word, because everything they read was true. At the end, the man closed the file and asked whether she had anything she wanted to add. She said she would clean thoroughly. She wouldn't take anything from the house, and if they didn't believe her, they could count everything. 3 weeks later, when her file was sent upstairs for final approval, the signature in the last box belonged to Emmett Vance, and he signed it one morning along with nearly 30 other files, without asking a single question, without rereading a single line, between 2 telephone calls about fuel prices. People in the house talked, just as Vance had said, but not one of them dared talk about the girl on the 2nd floor. When it came to Giada Sarno, people spoke by not speaking at all. For 3 years, no one in that house had played music. The radio in the kitchen had been unplugged during the first winter, and no one had plugged it back in, and no one had explained why, and new employees were given only one brief instruction, that music was not played in this house. In the glass room stood a mirror nearly as tall as a person, and it had been turned to face the wall on the very day she came home from the hospital, and no one was allowed to turn it back around. As for the 3rd rule, no one needed to be told, because anyone who tried once never tried a second time. No one was allowed to touch her legs. They had gone through 4 caregivers during the first year because of that. Every Thursday morning, Dr. Naomi Whitlock came. She was the only person on the list who could enter that house without calling ahead. And she was the only person Giada didn't order out, not because she liked her, but because Dr. Whitlock never spoke to her in a soothing voice. That morning's examination went the way they always did. She told Giada to close her eyes, then touched the tip of a probe to the top of her right foot, and asked what she felt. Giada said she felt nothing. Dr. Whitlock tried again in another place. Giada was silent for a long time, then said yes, maybe something, but it was very far away, like hearing someone calling from downstairs while you were still asleep. Dr. Whitlock wrote it down in the chart without changing her expression. When she stepped into the hallway, Elias was already waiting in the place where he always waited, 3 steps from the bedroom door, close enough to hear but without having to enter. "Still the same?" he said. Not exactly. I need you to be clear. Her injury is incomplete, Dr. Whitlock said. I told you that from the beginning, and I am still telling you the same thing. It means the pathways carrying the signals were not completely severed. Some remain. How much remains? I cannot measure with any machine, and I will not guess. Then what does it take for those pathways to work again? Time. Repetition until everyone is sick of it. A body that is allowed to rest when it needs to, and someone who wakes up every morning still wanting to try. Elias stood still. He had heard versions of that answer from people wearing hospital badges on 3 continents, and he had paid each of them sums he hadn't bothered to ask twice about. I can hire someone to stay here 24 hours a day, he said. I can buy equipment your hospital doesn't even have. You can? I know you can. But I am going to say this plainly once. Mr. Sarno, hope is not medicine. It does not heal anything. It only helps a person get through the door in the morning. Everything beyond that door is work. And no one can do that work for her. Not even you. At the far end of the hallway, a maid passed carrying a stack of towels and walked very quickly. For 3 years I have done everything that can be done. You have done everything that can be bought. Elias turned his head toward her. In this house, people did not speak to him that way. And Dr. Whitlock knew it. And she said it anyway. I am not trying to insult you, she said. I have simply noticed something, and I notice it every week. You ask me about your sister in exactly the voice people use when they ask about an investment that is losing money. When will it recover? How much more has to be put into it? You have never once asked me what she said today. Elias opened his mouth. He was a man an entire city waited to hear speak, and he couldn't find the next sentence. Dr. Whitlock lifted her bag back onto her shoulder. I will come again next Thursday, she said, and then she walked down the stairs. Elias remained exactly where he was, 3 steps from the door, and inside the room, there was no sound at all. That afternoon, after she finished cleaning the 3rd floor and returned the mop to exactly where it belonged, Marisol went up to the 2nd floor. No one stopped her. That had been the strangest thing about the past week, that she could walk past the 2 men standing at the end of the hallway, and they would step aside for her, and she didn't know what to do with people making way for her. So she simply nodded in greeting and kept walking. She knocked on the door. There was no answer. She knocked again, then pushed it open. Giada was sitting with her back turned in the patch of sunlight, and she didn't look around. Hello, Marisol said. You came to the wrong floor. No, I came to the right one. Then what are you doing up here? I wanted to ask you something. You're going to ask if I want to laugh again, aren't you? Giada turned the wheelchair around. Light from the glass doors fell across her face, and Marisol could see clearly that the girl had been preparing for this conversation since the day before. Listen to me. I laughed that day because you looked ridiculous. You dragged that leg around the room like an injured duck, and I laughed. And that was all. It didn't mean anything. Don't start imagining things. I'm not imagining anything. Yes, you are. You think you did something important. You think you went home last night thinking, I made that girl laugh. Didn't you? Marisol didn't answer. I knew it, Giada said. Everyone who comes in here thinks the same thing. Then 2 weeks later they leave. I was going to ask whether you wanted to try some arm movements, Marisol said. You can do them sitting down. I used to dance. I know a few exercises that only use the arms and shoulders. There was a silence, and somewhere inside that silence Marisol realized she had said the wrong thing, though she didn't yet understand which part had been wrong. Giada pulled the shawl from her shoulders and threw it onto the floor between them. What did you just say? I said, dance, sitting in a chair. Her voice was very quiet, and it was quiet in the way that made a person want to step backward. Do you know what I did before I ended up in this chair? Of course you don't, because no one in this house tells the help things like that. So let me tell you, I used to stand in the front row. They put me in the front row because I deserved to be there, not because of my last name. I trained until my toenails came off. And now you walk in here, a woman who cleans floors, and tell me to sit in this chair and wave my arms in the air for fun. The shawl remained on the floor between them. No one picked it up. That isn't dancing, Giada said. That is a little performance people invent for disabled people, so they have something to talk about afterward. You keep me busy for an hour, then you go downstairs and tell Mrs. Constance. She cooperated today. I know that game. I have been sitting in this house for 3 years. Everyone has a game. Marisol remained standing in the middle of the room. You can leave now, Giada said. And just so you know, all I have to do is say one thing to my brother, and you lose your job. Do you understand? You think he let you stay that day because he was being kind. My brother kept you the way he would keep a machine that makes noise. When the machine stops making noise, you know what happens next. Marisol looked at the shawl on the floor. Then she did something she hadn't planned to do herself. She didn't pick it up. She didn't leave. She took 2 steps forward and lowered herself onto the wooden floor right there, about an arm's length from the wheelchair, moving slowly because her left knee wouldn't allow her to do it any faster. Once she was seated, she looked up, and her eyes were level with Giada's. Then she said nothing. "What are you doing?" Marisol didn't answer. "I asked what you're doing." There was no reply. Giada said several more things, and those words were harder to hear than the ones that had come before, and Marisol still sat there quietly, looking at her. Then Giada turned the wheelchair away, moved toward the window, and gave her back to the room. Marisol remained where she was. The sunlight beyond the glass shifted from gold to orange, then slowly faded. Downstairs came the sound of dishes being cleared away. Marisol's left knee went numb, then began to ache sharply, and after a while she stopped paying attention to it. "Mrs." Constance passed the doorway twice, looked inside, and both times kept walking. It wasn't until the room held only the last light, before someone would have to turn on a lamp, that the wheelchair slowly began to turn back. Giada looked at the woman who was still sitting on the floor of her room. Marisol looked back. Neither of them said a single word. "Why haven't you left yet?" Giada asked. Her voice was different from the afternoon. Not softer, only more tired. Marisol was still sitting on the floor with both arms wrapped around her right knee, the good one. "Because I once sat exactly where you're sitting," she said. "You've never been in a wheelchair." "No, I don't mean the chair. I mean the place." She was quiet for a moment, then continued slowly, like someone choosing each word so she wouldn't have to say more than necessary. "There was a stretch of my life when I sat in a room and knew very clearly that if I didn't walk out of that room, no one was going to come looking for me. People passed by. People asked how I was from outside the door, but no one came inside and sat down. Everyone stood, and when people stand, they're always higher than you, and if they're higher than you, sooner or later, they leave." Giada said nothing. "So I sat," Marisol said. "That's all. I didn't mean anything else by it." Outside the glass doors, the sky had gone completely dark. Giada reached over and switched on the lamp beside her chair. "What's wrong with your leg?" "A piece of cartilage tore in my knee. I fell on the service stairs at my old job." "Why didn't you have surgery?" "Because surgery costs money." Giada looked at her for a long time. "You said you used to study dance." "I did." "Where?" "You wouldn't know it. It wasn't a place like yours." Giada turned the wheelchair until it faced straight ahead, then looked down at her hands resting in her lap. "Just the arms," she said. "I'm not promising anything. Just the arms." Marisol pressed her hands against the floor and stood, and it took her a while before she could straighten fully, and Giada saw it but said nothing. "No music," Giada said. "Music isn't allowed in this house." "Then I'll count." Marisol stood in front of her about 1 step away. She raised both arms slowly to shoulder height, then lowered them. She did it again. "Follow me. Don't look at my hands. Look straight ahead, shoulders down. Don't tighten your neck. I know how to hold my shoulders." "Then you're already better at it than I am." Giada lifted both arms. Halfway up they began to tremble, and she lowered them and swore very quietly. "That's normal," Marisol said. "You haven't used them this way in 3 years." Again. They tried again. Marisol counted with her voice, without clapping, without tapping out a rhythm. On the 4th attempt, Giada's arms reached shoulder height and stayed there for the length of 1 breath. By the 7th, sweat had appeared at her temples. On the 9th, while her arms were opening out to the sides, she suddenly stopped. "Wait. If you're tired, rest." "That's not it." She sat completely still. Her entire face changed, and Marisol noticed the change before she understood what it meant. "Look down," Giada said. Her voice was so quiet it was almost soundless. "Look at my right foot." Marisol looked down. The white sock, the foot resting on the wheelchair support, didn't move. Then the big toe curled slightly, barely at all, and straightened again. "Did you see that?" "I saw it," Marisol said. Neither woman dared say another word. "Mrs." Constance was called upstairs, and she stood in the doorway and watched, then went downstairs to make a phone call. And for the first time in 3 years she called Dr. Whitlock outside her usual hours. Dr. Whitlock arrived before midnight, her hair tied back in a hurry, her coat thrown over her nightclothes. The examination took nearly an hour. She asked no one any questions while she worked. When she stepped into the hallway, Elias was already standing there. "Is it real?" "Yes." "Then I need you to tell me what we do next." "You don't need to do anything. There's a center in Colorado," Elias said. "I'll have someone contact them tonight. They have 3 of the best specialists in the field. I'll pay to have them come here and stay in the house if necessary. I'll have the downstairs sitting room cleared out and install every piece of equipment you prescribe. Whatever you name." "No, you haven't heard the rest." "I've heard enough." "No." She fastened the buttons of her coat again. You are not buying another machine for this house. You are not bringing another stranger into that room. What your sister managed tonight happened because someone sat on the floor with her for hours and asked nothing from her. You bring 3 specialists into that room, and next week she'll turn her face back toward the wall, and this time I won't come back. Elias said nothing. I'll be here Thursday, Dr. Whitlock said. Leave everything exactly as it is. Then she walked down the stairs, and he heard the front door close below, and he remained exactly where he was, 3 steps from the door, while inside the room came the sound of 2 women counting. From that day on, the sessions became a routine. Every evening after Marisol finished her work, though no one in the house called them sessions, people only said she had gone upstairs. Elias still came home late as always, still walked past the second-floor hallway as always, still stopped in the same place 3 steps from the door. One evening near the end of the month, he was walking through the 3rd-floor hallway when he saw it. On the freshly mopped tile floor, still shining and slightly damp, there was a dark spot about the size of a coin, near the place where someone usually knelt to clean along the baseboard. He stopped. He looked at it, then followed the line of tiles with his eyes, and about 2 yards farther down there was another mark, fainter, partly wiped over. Marisol was at the end of the hallway, pushing herself up from the floor with one hand braced against the edge of a cabinet. She pulled her pant leg down before turning around. Stay there. She stopped. Pull your pant leg up. Sir, I've finished cleaning. I'll go over that spot again right away. I'm not asking about the floor. She pulled the pant leg up. The bandage around her left knee had soaked through in one place. She stood there with her eyes lowered, like someone who had been caught stealing. Since when? It only opened a little, sir. From kneeling too much. I can just change the bandage. I asked since when. Since before I started working here. Elias said nothing for a long moment. He thought about the thin file they had read aloud to her in that windowless room at the warehouse, and he remembered that it contained the debt, the name of her former landlady, the name of a hospital. There had been nothing about her knee. They had investigated everything they needed to know to make sure she posed no danger to this house, and no one had bothered to find out where she hurt, because pain wasn't the sort of thing people recorded in files like that. Tomorrow morning, Mrs. Constance will take you to a doctor, he said. Sir, I don't need. I didn't ask whether you needed it. She fell silent. He walked 3 steps, then stopped, and he didn't turn around when he spoke. What's your name? It took her a beat to answer. Marisol Reyes, sir. I know, he said. Then he went downstairs. That night, close to 1 o'clock in the morning, Marisol went down to the kitchen for water and found the light still on. Elias was sitting at the staff dining table, the long wooden table where he had never sat before, with a cup of something cold in front of him. She started to back away. Sit down. She sat at the far end of the table. Let me ask you something, he said. Why didn't you tell anyone? What would telling anyone change, sir? You could have taken time off. Time off means no pay. No pay means I can't send anything this month. She said it in the same voice people used to talk about the weather. Besides, I didn't want anyone thinking I came into this house to ask for things. I'm more afraid of that than I am of my leg. Elias turned the cup slowly on the table. My father had something he used to tell me from before I was old enough to understand what it meant, he said. Never owe anyone a favor, because a favor is a rope people tie around your neck. They won't pull it right away. They'll leave it there and pull 10 years later. I grew up with that sentence. My whole family lives by it. So in this house, no one gives anyone anything for nothing, and anyone who accepts something knows exactly what they just signed. He looked up at her. And you sit on the floor with my sister for hours, every day, with your leg like that, and you haven't asked me for a single thing. I haven't asked because I get paid, sir. You get paid to clean the house. Marisol didn't answer. You've been working here for months, Elias said. I just realized that in all those months, I have never once asked you a question that wasn't about my sister. Not one. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Sir, you don't have to. I'm not apologizing to you, he said. I'm only saying it aloud. He stood, carried the cup to the sink, and washed it himself. And Marisol watched him without believing what she was seeing. My mother had a phone number, he said, his back still turned. For 3 years, every month, the bill for that number has been sent here. I keep paying it. He placed the cup on the rack. I've never called it, he said. I just haven't been able to disconnect it. Then he turned off the kitchen light before walking out. And in the darkness, he added one final sentence in the same calm voice he always used. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, Mrs. Constance will be waiting for you at the gate. The doctor at the clinic said that knee needed surgery, and said plainly that if she kept kneeling to scrub floors, one day it would stop allowing her to kneel at all. Marisol listened, thanked him, then went back up to the second floor the following day as usual, and no one in the house mentioned it again. But news in a large house traveled faster than people did, and by the end of the month, when the entire Sarno family gathered for the dinner they held once every year, everyone sitting at the table already knew. No one said it directly. They said it in other ways. Someone asked after Giada, then remarked that they had heard she had started cooperating with her exercises lately. Thank goodness. Perhaps all she had needed was someone who knew how to coax her. Someone else said they had a very good maid at their own house too. Had kept her for several years. But of course everyone had to be careful, because it was difficult when someone lived inside your home and you didn't really know where they came from. Then Philomena, Elias's aunt, who was seated nearest the head of the table, set down her fork and spoke in the voice of someone who had just remembered something. I heard you let that cleaning girl come and go from Giada's room whenever she wants. Yes. Do you know where she was sleeping before she came here? I do. Then you also know she owes money. I know the exact amount, Elias said. Philomena gave a short laugh. I'm only mentioning it. People outside the family look in and they don't understand. Our family has a voice in this city, and a voice is a fragile thing. Elias set his napkin on the table and stood. The entire table fell silent. For 3 years, he said. You have sent flowers on her birthday. Uncle Frank sends a card. Aunt Rosalind calls every holiday to ask how she is, and every time she tells me she is too busy to come by. I count all of it. I count everything in this house. Nona. In those 3 years, not one person sitting at this table walked into her room and sat on the floor with her. Not one. His eyes moved around the table. Her name is Marisol Reyes. She sat on my floor for 40 straight minutes, while my sister said things to her that you wouldn't tolerate hearing for 1 minute. Aunt Philomena. In this house, anyone who cannot say that name doesn't need to say mine anymore. Philomena went pale, but she was a woman who knew when to remain still. She waited through dessert. Waited until everyone drifted into the adjoining room, then followed Elias into the study and closed the door behind her. You just humiliated me in front of the whole family. You started that conversation, not me. Fine. She let out a breath. I came here for another reason anyway. My Colin is being sued. The bidding matter on the north side. You know about it. He didn't mean to do anything wrong. Someone set him up. I know the case. You only need to make one call. No. Philomena blinked. You haven't heard the rest. I've heard enough. I'm not making the call. Elias, he is your cousin. You have sat at that table for years, he said. And not once have you asked where the food on that table came from. You didn't ask because you didn't want to know, and I never blamed you for that. But now you want me to pick up the phone, which means you do want to know, and you only want to know at the exact moment it benefits your son. She stood there with one hand tightening around the strap of her handbag. You've changed. No, he said. I'm exactly the same. You just never asked me for anything before. Philomena left the study, walked straight to the front door without saying goodbye to anyone, and her car left Astor Street before the rest of the family had time to understand what had happened. At the second intersection, she told the driver to pull over. She sat in silence for a while, then took out her phone, found a name in her contacts that she hadn't called since her brother's funeral, and pressed call. It rang twice. Good evening, Aunt Philomena, Emmett Vance said. His voice sounded as though he were smiling. This is late for you. I just left my nephew's house. Yes, I heard the family had dinner tonight. Do you know about the maid? There was a brief pause on the other end, and within that pause she heard ice touch the side of a glass. I was the one who approved her file, ma'am, Vance said. I knew about her before he did. Winter came and went, and in the glass room on the second floor the work continued. From the arms, they moved to the shoulders. From the shoulders down to the back. Dr. Whitlock came every Thursday, measured, wrote things down, and each time she left she said only one thing to Mrs. Constance. Leave everything exactly as it is. Then one afternoon, Giada told Marisol to remove all the support pillows from behind her back. Leave one. No. Take them all. Then you're going to fall forward. Then I fall. Marisol removed every pillow and placed them on the floor. Then she unfastened the strap across Giada's waist and knelt beside the chair, putting her good knee down first, one hand hovering about the width of a palm away from Giada's body. Don't catch me. I'm not catching you. I'm only keeping my hand here. Move your hand. No. Giada didn't argue again. She took a breath and lifted her back away from the chair. The first time she lasted about 2 breaths, before tipping to the right, and Marisol had to touch her shoulder. The second time was the same. On the third, she pitched forward and managed to catch herself with her own hands, and she swore, and Marisol laughed, and Giada asked, "What are you laughing at?" And Marisol said, "I'm laughing because you just caught yourself." And Giada fell silent. Mrs. Constance came up carrying towels and stopped in the doorway to watch, then didn't leave. By the 6th attempt, Giada said stop, and they rested, and she drank water, and the hair at her temples clung to her skin. "One more time," she said. "You're tired. Just one more." Marisol stepped back half a pace. Giada lifted her back away from the chair. This time she didn't tip in either direction. She sat upright, shoulders open, chin raised slightly, and the posture appeared in her body like something that had been there all along, waiting all these years for someone to call it by name. At the door, "Mrs." Constance raised a hand to her chest. "1," Marisol said. "2." Giada didn't move. 3, 4. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Elias stopped where he always stopped. 3 steps from the door, then took 1 step forward, then another, and walked fully into the room without anyone noticing. 5, 6. "Mrs." Constance began counting with her. Her voice trembled. 7, 8. Giada's arms began to shake, but her upper body didn't collapse. She stared straight ahead, sweat running down one side of her face, and she didn't blink. 9, 10. "Mrs." Constance said. 11, Elias said. Then Giada fell forward, and Marisol caught her by the shoulders, and both of them dropped heavily back down, and there was no sound in the room except breathing. Giada looked up. She saw her brother standing in the middle of the room, not at the door, and she saw Mrs. Constance wiping her face with the towel she had meant to bring up for her. 11 seconds, she said. She gave a short laugh, the kind of laugh a person uses to make something smaller before anyone else has the chance to make it bigger. What can 11 seconds do? People sit all day, and nobody applauds them. "You're right," Marisol said. She was still breathing hard, both hands pressed to the floor to steady herself. 11 seconds can't do anything, but those 11 seconds are yours. They don't belong to any doctor. They don't belong to any machine. Your brother couldn't buy them anywhere, and I couldn't give them to you. You earned them yourself, right here in this room, this afternoon. Giada opened her mouth as though she meant to say something, then stopped. She turned her head away and raised the back of her hand to her face. Then a sound came from the middle of the room. It was short, rough, and unlike anything Mrs. Constance had heard in that house since that winter. Elias Sarno was laughing. He stood there with one hand resting on the lid of the piano covered in white cloth, his head lowered slightly, and he laughed the way people laugh when they haven't had time to prepare for it. "Mrs." Constance turned all the way around to look at him. Giada lowered her hand. "What are you laughing at?" she said. "Nothing," Elias said. "Are you laughing at me?" "No." He stopped for a moment, then continued, and his voice no longer sounded like the voice people heard at all those other tables. "I was just thinking that you're sitting exactly the way you used to." "Exactly. That chin. Mom always said you lifted your chin like the whole stage belonged to you." Giada looked at her brother for a very long time. "It did belong to me," she said. And in the glass room on the 2nd floor, all 4 of them began to laugh. The sound came around 3 o'clock in the morning, and Mrs. Constance was the first to hear it, because her room was directly below. By the time she reached the 2nd floor, the light in the glass room was already on, and Giada was lying on her side on the floor beside the steel training frame that normally stood in the corner. She wasn't crying out. She only said very calmly that Mrs. Constance shouldn't call her brother yet. "Mrs." Constance called him immediately. The ambulance arrived before dawn. At the hospital, they took x-rays, and the physician on duty used the word Dr. Whitlock had warned them about since the first winter. The word no one in the house had wanted to remember, that after years of sitting, bones become thin, and when bones become thin, it doesn't take a major impact to break them. They put her in a cast. They said she had to remain still for several weeks, and during those weeks there would be no exercises at all, no sitting upright, no removing the support belt, nothing. Dr. Whitlock arrived around noon, studied the images, then went out and sat in a chair in the hospital hallway without saying anything for a long time. And it was the first time Marisol had ever seen her like that. "Why was she practicing alone at 3 o'clock in the morning?" Elias said. No one could answer him. Giada was brought home after 4 days. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't order anyone out, but she didn't answer anyone either. And Mrs. Constance told Marisol that this was worse than when Giada used to drive people away, and Marisol knew she was right. The steel training frame was removed from the room the very next morning. The corner where it had stood was empty now, and the entire room seemed to be staring at that empty corner. On the 3rd day after Giada came home, Marisol went upstairs as usual, sat down on the floor in the same place, and remained there all afternoon without saying anything, just as she had the first time. Near evening, Giada finally spoke. "Go home." "Yes, I'll go in a little while." No, go for good. Don't come up here anymore. Marisol didn't move. Do you know what I was practicing at 3 o'clock in the morning? Giada said. She was still looking toward the glass doors. You haven't asked. Everyone asks why. No one asks what I was practicing. Then what were you practicing? Standing. Marisol said nothing. I was trying to stand up, Giada said. Not because I needed to do anything. I just wanted there to be a day when he came home from work, opened the door, and I was standing in the middle of the room. I wanted to see his face when he saw me. I had been practicing for several nights. I held on to the frame, pulled myself up, and I could stay there longer than I did the night you counted. Much longer. I was going to show him on his birthday. Her voice remained even. That was the hardest part to hear. Now I'm lying here, she said, and people have to lift me to take me to the bathroom again. Do you understand? I stopped needing that 3 years ago, and now I have to let people lift me again. She turned her head. Her eyes were dry. Before you came into this house, I sat in this room, and I didn't want anything. I didn't want music. I didn't want to look in a mirror. I didn't want tomorrow. Do you know how easy that was? It was quiet. No one could hurt me because I wasn't waiting for anything. So there was nothing to hurt. Marisol remained on the floor with both arms wrapped around her knee. Then you came up here, sat down in that place, and started counting for me. And I started wanting things. Giada said the last sentence very softly. You gave me hope. Before I had it, I lived very quietly. Do you understand what you took away from me? The only sound in the room was the clock. Marisol opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had lived long enough to know there were moments when even the right answer was the worst possible answer. So she stayed silent. Then she placed her hands on the floor, rose slowly as she always did, and walked toward the door. At the doorway she stopped, but she didn't turn around. I'll still come up tomorrow, she said. Don't. I'll still come up tomorrow. Then she closed the door behind her. In the dark hallway outside, 3 steps away, Elias Sarno was standing there. And he had been standing there for a long time. Early Friday morning that week, Emmett Vance arrived at the house before his scheduled time and told Mrs. Constance not to disturb the young master, saying he could wait in the small study beside the staircase. He sat there for nearly an hour. He opened his briefcase, took out a stack of papers, looked through them, then arranged them again. When Marisol passed with a pile of towels in her arms, he called to her. Would you help me with something? He pointed to several sheets that had fallen to the floor beside the table leg. At my age, bending down is not as easy as it used to be. She set the towels on a chair and bent to pick them up. Vance remained seated, still smiling, and he didn't watch her as she gathered the pages. She straightened them into a neat stack, and while doing so, her eyes passed over the top sheet, and she stopped. It was a quarterly income and expense statement, densely printed, belonging to a consumer finance company she had never heard of. But in the right-hand column, among the list of affiliated entities, was a name she had seen every month for years, printed in the upper left corner of every collection notice sent to her room. She stood up very slowly. Thank you, Vance said, taking the stack from her hands, tapping the edges against the table to straighten them, then putting it back into his briefcase. Take care of that leg. She said yes. She picked up the towels and continued down the hallway, and she didn't stop until she had reached the end of it. And then she stood there for a very long time. That afternoon she didn't go upstairs. She waited downstairs until Elias's car returned, then knocked on the study door. Sir, may I ask you something? Yes. The company that sends me the collection notices. Does it belong to your family? Elias was removing his cufflinks. His hand stopped. Tell me the name. She did. He didn't answer immediately. He sat down, opened a drawer, took out a ledger, and he didn't need to look anything up in it. He only rested his hand on the cover. Not directly, he said, then indirectly. It sits beneath another company, and that company sits beneath another one. I don't know exactly how many layers there are. 7, maybe 8, but the money comes back here. He didn't answer. Sir, I'm asking again, where does the money end up? Here, he said. Marisol nodded. She didn't sit down, and her voice didn't rise at all. And years later, Mrs. Constance, who had been standing in the hallway, would say she had thought the two of them were discussing the weather. So all these years, Marisol said, every month I divided my loose money into 3 piles on the blanket in my room. The biggest pile I sent away. Some months I took money out of the food pile to add to it. Some months I walked home because I didn't want to spend the bus fare. And every one of those dollars eventually came back to this house. Marisol, I kneel on the floor and clean your house, she said, so I can pay you. Elias placed both hands on the desk. I didn't know, he said. And it was the only thing he could manage, because the moment he said it, he knew it didn't save him. I believe you, Marisol said. That's the worst part. He looked up. If you knew, then you would be a bad man. And I have met plenty of bad men. I know how to live around them. But you didn't know. You sit at this desk. You sign papers. You count the money when it comes in. And you have never asked how many hands it passed through before it reached you. You never looked down. 7 layers of paperwork, sir. And you never opened past the second one. That isn't innocence. That is just living so high up you can't hear what is happening below. He said nothing. He was the man an entire city waited to hear speak next. And he sat in silence. Dr. Whitlock told you that you do everything money can buy, she said. I heard her. I was standing in the hallway. At the time, I felt sorry for you. She untied her apron, folded it, and placed it on the edge of the desk. I'm resigning. You don't have to resign. I do. I will deal with that company tonight. You will never have to pay another $1. There, she said. You're doing exactly what you always do. She stepped back. You can't erase it, sir. That debt is the one thing in my life I chose to carry myself. If you take it away from me, what do I have left? Elias stood. Have you told Giada? No, and please don't tell her. Just say I have family matters to deal with. She reached the door, then stopped. And this time she turned back. Tomorrow morning, tell Mrs. Constance to leave the door upstairs open, she said. That room gets too stuffy. No one hired a maid who had just quit working for the Sarno family without asking why. And when people asked, Marisol didn't know how to answer, so she stopped applying for housework. She went back to the place she knew. The tunnel connecting the two ends of the elevated train station was where she had stood for years before someone called her to the warehouse by the river. She knew where the drafts came through, where security wouldn't chase her away, and what hours brought the heaviest foot traffic. She brought her old speaker, spread a piece of cardboard over the concrete floor, and stood there during the afternoon rush. But her left knee no longer allowed her to do what she had once done. She could only dance with her arms and shoulders, the same movements she had taught someone else inside a room with glass doors. And down here in the tunnel, those movements didn't look like much of anything. People passed without stopping. Some glanced at her and kept walking. Some dropped a coin into the hat without looking at her. She stood there for nearly 2 hours, and not one person laughed. She went home, counted the money, and it wasn't enough to cover the amount she still sent every month. The second week, she went back anyway. One afternoon, a young man stood for quite a while on the other side of the tunnel, with his phone raised at chest level, and she thought he was sending a message. The article appeared the following Tuesday morning on a local news site that specialized in city life. The main photograph was centered and clear, her face visible, the bandage around her knee visible, the worn shoes split open at the toes visible, the hat resting on the floor visible. Beneath it was her debt history, the exact amount, the exact company name, along with the name of the former landlady who had asked her to leave her room. Then the article said that this woman had worked inside a prominent household on Astor Street, had been allowed into the private room of the family's daughter, and after leaving that house had returned to this exact place. The article didn't make any accusation. It simply placed 2 photographs beside each other, one of the gate of the Astor Street house and one of Marisol beneath the train tunnel, and left readers to think for themselves. By noon it had been shared everywhere. Inside the organization, people didn't read local news sites, but by afternoon a different story had begun traveling from the warehouse by the river to the truck yard, then to several restaurants on the west side. That story said the maid hadn't really been there to clean. It said no one simply placed a woman drowning in debt inside the young master's house, unless someone needed a pair of ears in there. It said federal investigators had been asking questions about several consumer finance companies since spring. And now, somehow, a cleaning woman who knew every entrance and hallway in that house had suddenly been released back onto the street. No one told that story loudly. They told it in parking lots between cigarettes. On Thursday afternoon, the community center in Pilsen received a phone call. The center held a fundraising performance at the end of every season, and every year it had the same 3 regular sponsors, and one of those sponsors was the transportation company, where Emmett Vance sat on the executive board. The caller was very polite. He said things were difficult this year, and he was very sorry, and he asked how the leaking roof in the downstairs rehearsal room was doing. By the following afternoon, the second sponsor had called too, and they used almost exactly the same words. The woman who ran the center sat looking at the budget on her desk, then crossed out the sound equipment rental, then crossed out the cost of printing flyers, and finally held her pen above the final line for a very long time. That same afternoon, beneath the train station tunnel, Marisol packed the speaker into her bag earlier than usual, because 2 people had passed her that day and looked at her longer than normal, and one of them had turned back to look again. She rolled up the piece of cardboard, tucked it beneath her arm, and walked home. and she didn't understand why it had taken until now for her to begin feeling afraid. The car was parked at the entrance to the alley behind the rooming house before the sky was fully light. Marisol was coming down the stairs when she saw it, and she recognized it immediately, because no car like that had ever appeared in this alley before. The rear door opened. "Get in." She got in. The inside was warm, and the smell of the leather seats reminded her of the second-floor hallway, and she sat on the very edge of the seat so she wouldn't get anything dirty. Elias didn't look at her. He stared straight through the windshield, both hands resting on his thighs, wearing the same suit he always wore to work, which meant he had come here before his workday had even begun. "Have you read that article?" "Yes, sir." "Then you understand the situation." "Sir, I haven't said a single word to anyone about that house. Not one word. You can ask anyone at the center. Ask my landlady. I'm not asking you about that." He took an envelope from inside his coat and placed it on the seat between them, then pushed it toward her with 2 fingers, exactly the way he had pushed the paper toward the contractor at dinner that night. "Take this," he said. "Leave the city, or stay. That is up to you. But you are not to go near that street again. You are not to go near the center in Pilsen again. And you are not to mention my family's name to anyone. If I hear your name somewhere again, I will not come here to speak to you a second time." Marisol looked at the envelope. It was thick. "I won't take it. I didn't ask whether you would." "Sir, listen carefully." His voice didn't grow louder. It only slowed. And Marisol realized that this was the first time he had spoken to her in the voice the entire city was used to hearing. "You are an outsider. You came into my house as an employee. You were paid in full, and now that employment is over. That house owes you nothing, and you have no place in it. Do you understand me? What about Giada? My sister is none of your concern. She's still in a cast. I know how my sister is. She'll ask. Then I'll answer her." Marisol sat in silence. Outside, a man pushing a garbage cart passed the mouth of the alley. "Let me see her once," she said. "Just once. 10 minutes. You can have someone stand there the whole time." "No, I only need to tell her I didn't leave her." I said no. She looked up at him. He was still staring straight ahead. "That night in the kitchen," she said, "you told me you weren't apologizing to me. You were only saying something aloud. I've remembered that sentence for months. I kept thinking the man who sat at that kitchen table that night was who you really were." "Get out of the car." She opened the door. She left the envelope on the seat. "Take it." "No, sir." She closed the door. The car didn't leave immediately. It remained there in the alley for a while before finally pulling away. Inside, Elias Sarno picked up the envelope and put it back into his coat pocket. Then he bent down, opened the briefcase at his feet, and took out a stack of photographs that had been delivered to his house close to midnight the night before, with no sender and no letter attached. The first showed Marisol standing beneath the train station tunnel on Monday. The second showed her walking home on Tuesday, photographed from behind from about 10 paces away. The third showed the window of her room from across the street at night, the light still on Wednesday. 3 days in a row. Whoever had taken the photographs had made no effort to hide the fact that they were taking them. That was the real meaning of the photographs, and Elias understood it from the first one, because he had grown up in a house where people sent messages in exactly this way. He gathered the photographs back into a neat stack, returned them to the briefcase, and sat perfectly still as the car drove out of the neighborhood. In the garage of the Astor Street house, there was a car everyone in the household called Giada's car. The rear door and floor had been modified so she could be taken to medical appointments and therapy, and it followed a schedule that anyone paying attention could easily remember. Tuesday morning and Friday morning, leaving at 9 o'clock and returning before noon. That Friday morning, Elias told the driver to take the day off. He told the 2 men who normally sat in the front to take the day off as well. Mrs. Constance stood at the garage door and asked where he was going, and he didn't answer. He only asked whether Giada was still asleep, and when she said yes, he told her not to wake her. He got into the driver's seat. The rear floor was empty, the wheelchair anchors were empty, and the restraint strap remained rolled up where it always was. He backed through the gate at exactly 9 o'clock and followed the same route this car took every Friday morning. At the second intersection, a dark-colored car turned in behind him. It stayed about 2 car lengths back. Elias didn't accelerate. He drove past the hospital where this car should have stopped, and he didn't stop, and the other car didn't stop either. He continued south. There was no music playing inside the car. There was no sound except the tires and the clicking of the turn signal. He passed the warehouse district by the river, drove all the way around the truck yard, came out onto the main road, then turned east again. The dark car remained behind him. When he reached a quiet stretch of road, he switched on his right turn signal, slowed down, pulled toward the curb, then suddenly moved back out and continued driving. The other car did exactly the same thing. Elias gave the smallest nod to himself. He drove for nearly another hour. He didn't need that long to know. He had known from the second intersection, but he kept driving, and through all of it he thought about the empty floor behind him. He thought about how, if this had been an ordinary Friday morning, his sister would have been sitting back there, in that exact place, and that other car would still have been following at the same distance, and not one person in the house would have known. He thought about the 3 photographs in his briefcase. The photographer hadn't hidden because the photographer had never intended to hide. The person who had sent those photographs wasn't saying, "I am watching her." That person was saying, "I can do this, and you don't know, and I want you to know that I can." Close to noon, Elias pulled to the side of a one-way street, shut off the engine, and sat still. The dark car behind him slowed, then parked about half a block away. Elias opened the door and stepped out. He didn't walk toward the other car. He stood beside his own in broad daylight, on a street where people were passing, and opened both rear doors, leaving them that way so the empty floor in the back was exposed beneath the sun. Then he took out his phone. It rang once. "Hello, Elias," Emmett Vance said. "You're calling early." Elias didn't ask how he was. He didn't ask about the waste contract on the west side, didn't ask about his health, didn't ask where he was. "The car is empty," Elias said. There was a silence on the other end. It was brief, but it was there. "I don't understand what you mean. Next time you want to watch someone, watch me." Then he ended the call. He didn't wait for an answer, didn't say another word, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He remained there for a while longer, with one hand resting on the roof of the car, his eyes fixed on the far end of the one-way street, never looking into the mirror, never looking behind him. Then he closed the rear doors, returned to the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away. Behind him, the dark car didn't follow. It remained parked in the same place when Elias turned off that street, and it stayed there for a long time afterward, and no one inside ever stepped out. The news reached Marisol on Tuesday night, through a call from the landline at the Astor Street house, and the caller was Mrs. Constance, speaking so quickly it sounded as though she was afraid someone might overhear. She said the area beneath the cast had become infected, that they had taken Giada to the hospital that afternoon, and she gave Marisol the name of the hospital, and when Marisol heard it, she had to sit down on the edge of the bed. Mercy General Hospital. She took the last bus. At the reception desk, she gave the patient's name, and they asked what relation she was to the patient. And she stood there unable to answer. She said she worked for the family. They told her that only family members were allowed into that section, and they said it kindly, and they pointed her toward the row of chairs in the hallway. She sat down there. She stayed there all night. She knew this hallway. She knew where the water fountain was in the corner, knew the sign with one letter where the paint had peeled away, even knew the smell of the freshly cleaned floor, because the cleaning solution they used here was still the same kind. Inside the room, close to dawn, Elias sat in the chair beside the bed. His sister had been drifting in and out of sleep for hours, and now she opened her eyes and spoke in the voice of someone deeply tired. "You're still here." "Yes." "Go home." "No." She was quiet for a while. "That smell," she said. "It smells exactly like last time. Go back to sleep." "Do you remember that night?" Elias didn't answer. "I don't remember much," Giada said. "They said it was the medication. I only remember pieces. I remember the ceiling moving above me. I remember someone calling my name over and over, and I couldn't answer." She stopped. "Then I remember someone sitting down beside me." "Who?" "I don't know. I couldn't see the person's face. I only remember a hand holding mine and not letting go. Everyone else moved past so quickly. Everyone was in a hurry, but that person stayed sitting there, and that person sang." Elias looked up. "Sang, very softly, almost like speaking. I couldn't make out the words. I only remember the melody, and that melody has stayed in my head for 3 years." She turned her face toward the window. "I've never told anyone about this. I didn't tell anyone because I knew it wasn't real. They said I was on strong medication then, and they said a lot of people experience things like that. Feel someone beside them when there is actually no one there." She gave a very small laugh. "I still missed it. That was the one thing from that night I wanted to keep, and it turns out even that wasn't real." The door to the room was partly closed. Someone passed in the hallway and pushed it a little farther open. Then came the sound of singing. It was quiet, almost spoken, in another language, only a few notes rising, then falling, then stopping. Giada turned her head. Her entire face went still. "Elias," she said. Elias was already on his feet. He went over and opened the door all the way. Marisol was standing there with both hands wrapped around her cloth bag, and she didn't step inside. and she finished the line of the song before stopping. You, Giada said. Sing it again. Marisol sang it again. Giada raised both hands to cover her face. It was you, she said. It was you. I didn't know it was you, Marisol said. Her voice wasn't steady either. I swear to you, I didn't know. I worked the night shift here. I cleaned this floor. She remained standing in the doorway and continued slowly, like someone telling a story she had kept put away for a very long time. That night was crowded. They wheeled you past the place I was cleaning, and you kept calling out, and no one could come because everyone was already dealing with something. I put down my mop. I sat beside you. I held your hand, and I sang the song my mother used to sing because I didn't know what else to do. Why didn't you come looking for me? Because the next day they called me upstairs. She said it in a perfectly ordinary voice. They wrote me up because I had left my assigned area. The rules said cleaning staff weren't allowed to have contact with patients. I signed the report, and I left this job that day. She looked up at the young woman in the bed. I've thought about you for 3 years, she said. I didn't know your name. I didn't know whether you survived. I kept wondering whether someone stayed with you after that. Giada lowered her hands. Someone did, she said. You did. You stayed. They let Giada go home after nearly a week, and Marisol went back with her, and no one in the house asked another question about it. On the 3rd day, someone rang the bell. Mrs. Constance went to answer, then came into the study and said there was a man standing outside the gate without an appointment, and he said he was Miss Reyes's former husband. Marisol was standing at the foot of the stairs. She heard every word clearly, and she didn't move. They let him into the small sitting room. His name was Dean Halloran, and he was thinner than the last day she had seen him, and he wore a coat that looked as though it had once been expensive, but hadn't been for a long time. He didn't apologize to her. He couldn't even manage a proper hello. I saw you in the paper, he said. I wasn't going to come, but I have this. He placed an envelope of documents on the table. I kept everything, he said. The papers from back then. Who gave them to me to sign? Who told me to put your name on them? Which company was behind it? Where the money went? I wrote it all down, with all the dates. The federal people want this very badly. He looked around the room, at the ceiling, at the painting on the wall. But I could also choose not to give it to them, he said. Elias had been leaning against the doorframe the entire time without saying anything. Now he stepped into the room. Name your price. I don't like that word. I don't care what you like. Dean Halloran gave him a number. He said it in the voice of a man who had practiced saying that number in the car. Then he sat down in a chair without being invited and began explaining that he had suffered too, that he had been pressured back then, that anyone in his position would have done the same thing. Elias didn't let him finish. He took out his phone, dialed a number, and raised it to his ear. The entire room went silent. Marisol saw his expression change, and she recognized it immediately because she had seen that expression once before, at the dinner when he had pushed a document across the table toward the contractor. Someone answered on the other end. Marisol heard the voice clearly. There is a man named Dean Halloran sitting in my house, Elias said. I need you to send someone to take him out of the city, and I need you to keep every document he brought with him, and I don't want to hear his name ever. Marisol placed her hand on the phone. She didn't snatch it away. She simply rested her hand over the back of his and pushed it down, very slowly, and Elias allowed her to. The person on the other end asked something. He ended the call. Dean Halloran remained frozen in the chair, his face drained white. What are you doing? I'm asking you, Marisol said. Her hand was still there. My whole life, every important thing has been decided by someone else. My father died, and someone else decided who I would live with. My mother lay in that hallway for 7 hours, and someone else decided whose name would be called first. This man signed my name on those papers, and he decided what my own name would mean. Then I went knocking on the doors of law offices, and they decided I didn't have enough money to be heard. There has never been one thing in my life where I was allowed to stand up and decide for myself. She lowered her hand. If you pick up that phone now and take care of this for me, then I will be free of the debt, but I will spend the rest of my life being the person who was saved that way. Every time I look at you, I will remember it. Every time I see my name on a piece of paper, I will remember it. I can't live like that, sir. You don't have money for a lawyer. Yes. You have no evidence beyond his word. Yes. You could lose. I know. She turned toward the man sitting in the chair. You take every one of those papers, she said, and you give them to the federal authorities. All of them. Don't hold back a single page. Dean Halloran opened his mouth. And as for my name, Marisol said, I'll go to court and take it back myself. The woman who ran the community center in Pilsen knew a young lawyer who took cases by the hour, and he agreed to handle Marisol's case on one condition, that she tell him everything, and hide nothing. The filing went to court at the beginning of summer. By midsummer, the other side produced what they called evidence of unexplained income. The packet included photographs of the white envelopes lying beneath the door of her rented room, taken from the hallway over a period of many months. There was a statement from her former landlady saying that she had seen those envelopes appearing for years and had no idea who sent them. The other side argued that a woman who claimed she couldn't afford a lawyer, a woman who walked home to save bus fare, had no obvious source for a regular amount of money arriving every month, and they asked the court to determine who had been paying her and for what purpose. The young lawyer sat across from Marisol in a small room at the community center and told her plainly that this was difficult, because in court, anonymous cash was almost always interpreted in the worst possible way. Marisol asked when they had to submit an explanation. The lawyer said 3 days. She said, "Then I'll bring it." 3 days later, she came carrying a shoebox. In the room that day were the lawyer, the woman who ran the community center as a witness, a court employee taking the record, and Elias Sarno seated in the back row, there as an invited observer, rather than someone intervening in the case. Marisol placed the box on the table and lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of thick white envelopes, all unmarked. Not one of them opened. "I never opened any of them," she said. "You never opened even one?" "No. I just kept them. I thought someone in the building felt sorry for me, and I was grateful to whoever it was. But my mother taught me not to touch anything I hadn't earned myself, so I put them away." The lawyer looked at the box, then at her, then said, "All right, then we open them now, in front of everyone, and we record every single one." They opened them. It took nearly 2 hours. Marisol counted every bill, read the amount from each envelope aloud for the court employee to record, then arranged the money into stacks across the table. Nothing had been taken from any envelope. Nothing was missing. Added together, the total was larger than the entire debt standing in her name, and it had been sitting beneath that bed for years, while the woman sleeping above it continued dividing her loose money into 3 piles every month. The woman from the community center had to turn her face away. Afterward, they traced the money, and it wasn't difficult, because the sender had never intended to hide the trail very well. They found an intermediary account, and from that account, they found a name. Emmett Vance had begun sending those envelopes before Marisol Reyes ever walked into the warehouse by the river to have her fingerprints taken. He hadn't sent the money to buy her. He had sent it so that one day, someone would ask where the money had come from. He had built the rope in advance, and had only been waiting for the moment when he needed to pull it. What he hadn't accounted for was that there might be one person in the world who could receive money for years and never spend a single dollar of it. Elias sat in the back row and said nothing through the entire proceeding. The case continued until late autumn. Handwriting analysis confirmed that the signatures on the loan contracts were not Marisol Reyes's. Dean Halloran was charged with document forgery, and the material he had turned over to federal investigators became evidence used against him before anything else. But the court didn't erase the debt. They explained that the money had been dispersed and used, that responsibility would have to be reassigned, and that Marisol would still have to repay a portion under a new schedule. The young lawyer told her this was already a better outcome than he had dared hope for. Marisol sat on the courthouse steps with the ruling in her hand and read her name again where it was printed on the top line. Elias stood a few steps away. "You still owe money," he said. "Yes, I can pay it. Today. I know you can." She folded the paper and placed it inside her cloth bag. "But now it is my debt," she said. "My name is on it because I signed it, and the court entered it into the record. From now on, every month when I send money, I'll know I'm paying something that belongs to me." She stood, and she had to hold the railing to pull herself upright. "All my life, people have written my name wherever they wanted," she said. "Today was the first time I wrote it myself." The file Dean Halloran turned over to the federal authorities pointed toward the consumer finance companies, and once people started looking there, they would begin tracing their way upward, and everyone in the organization knew it. Elias didn't wait for them to make it through all 7 layers. He called a meeting at the restaurant on the west side, in the private room, with no servers present. Seated around the table were the men who ran each part of the operation, and at the far end sat Emmett Vance, arriving 10 minutes late and still smiling as he always did. Elias poured wine for no one. "I'm getting out," he said. "All of it. The lending business, the union side, the waste contracts. Starting today, you deal with Mr. Vance." No one said anything. Vance placed both hands on the table. "You're serious. There are 3 conditions. I had them put in writing. Every one of you signs, one at a time, and Mr. Vance signs last." The paper was passed around the table. "First, no one in this room, and no one working for anyone in this room goes near my sister. No watching her, no following her, no asking about her. Second, the same applies to Marisol Reyes. Vance raised an eyebrow. An outsider. Sign it. And the third condition? The lending operation closes. More than 30 families make their living from that side of the business. Drivers, dispatchers, collectors, they don't know anything. They just go to work. You take every one of them into the remaining operations. Keep their income unchanged for at least 2 years. That is in writing too. One of the men in the middle of the table asked what happened if they refused to sign. Then I don't leave, Elias said. I stay. And I sit in this exact chair for another 10 years. And you wait. They signed. Vance signed last, slowly. And when he handed the paper back, he still had one thing to say, that your father would never understand this. Elias took the paper, folded it in half, and slipped it into his coat. You were 10 minutes late, he said. My father would have left you standing outside the door. The harder part happened in another room, with 2 people from the prosecutor's office. Elias didn't confess on anyone else's behalf, and he didn't give anyone up. He gave them exactly what they needed to reconstruct the path of the money through the predatory lending operation. The ledgers, the structure, the names of the intermediary companies, and he accepted his own share of responsibility, as the man whose name sat at the top. In return, he demanded in writing that the wage-earning employees below him would not be prosecuted. They asked why he was doing that. He said because I was the one who signed, and they only answered phones. Bruno Castellano was the last person to leave the Astor Street house. He had been with Elias's father since before that street even had a gate, and he stood in the lobby holding his hat in both hands. And he wasn't angry, which was what made it harder to bear. I carried you before you knew how to walk, he said. I know. Your old man built this house over 30 years. You took it apart in one afternoon. Yes. Bruno nodded and put on his hat. Take good care of the girl, he said, then walked out, and he didn't look back. The price didn't come all at once. It arrived gradually over the following weeks in small things. The restaurant on the west side changed its name. 2 guards at the gate resigned, very politely, and both found new jobs with Vance. The phone in the study began to fall silent. Some evenings, the entire house went without a single call, and Elias sat at the table looking at the telephone and realized that in all his life, he had never known an evening like that. Then one late autumn afternoon, someone knocked at the gate. It was a man about Elias's age, wearing a knit cap and turning it slowly in his hands, and he said he had once driven for the collection side of the business. He said they really had transferred him to transportation as promised, but the new route was all the way out in the suburbs, adding 3 hours to his commute every day, and his wife was undergoing treatment. He wasn't asking for anything. He only said he had wanted to come in person and ask one question, whether Mr. Sarno understood that the decision he made that day had landed on the heads of people like him. Elias invited him inside. The man didn't come in. Elias stood at the gate of his own house and listened to everything, and he didn't offer a single explanation, because he knew that every explanation would only make things easier for him, not for the man standing there. I know, he said. Yes, the man replied. Then he put his hat back on and walked away. The Pilsen Community Center still held its fundraising performance, even though there were no sponsors left. And because of that, it took place in the downstairs rehearsal room itself, with rows of plastic chairs and an old wooden floor. Dr. Whitlock stood in the wings with her medical bag at her feet. She had made her position on this perfectly clear the week before, and Giada had listened to every word, and Giada was doing it anyway. So now the doctor simply stood there without speaking, her eyes never leaving the performance floor. Before the show began, Marisol handed Giada a paper bag. Inside was a pair of dance shoes. Whose are these? My mother bought them for me. It took her a whole year of payments to finish paying for them. Marisol said it in her ordinary voice, the same voice she used when talking about the weather. They never got to step onto a stage. Wear them there for me once. Giada held the shoes, and she couldn't manage to say thank you, so she only nodded. They danced together. Marisol stood, and as she had for so long, she could use only her arms and shoulders, while Giada remained seated, and most of the performance was the 2 women answering each other through movements. No one in that room knew. Had begun on an afternoon when one woman had lowered herself onto a wooden floor and simply stayed there. Near the end, the steel training frame was rolled into the middle of the floor. Giada took hold of it, pulled herself upward, and stood. The entire room fell silent. Dr. Whitlock stepped half a pace forward, then stopped. Giada stood there with both hands gripping the frame, her chin lifted, and she held herself upright longer than she had that afternoon when 4 people counted together in the glass room on the 2nd floor. Then she sat back down, and the entire room rose to its feet, and the applause inside that basement rehearsal room sounded louder than applause in any theater. Afterward, in the hallway behind the room, Elias told Marisol that he was establishing a foundation, that the foundation would open a program for people like his sister, and that he wanted her to run it. "You're giving me the job? I'm asking you to take it. Then I want an interview." He looked at her. "Are you joking?" "No. Let the board question me the same way they question everyone else. If I get the job, then someday when people talk, I'll still have something I can answer with." He was quiet for a moment, then said all right. In the car on the way home, Marisol said she would have to move soon because the room she was renting was no longer going to be available. Although, strangely enough, the new landlady had offered her a rent so low it made no sense. Giada laughed from the back seat. "Ask my brother." Marisol turned around. Elias kept his eyes on the road. "The lease on that place is under someone else's name," he said. "Since that morning in the alley?" She said nothing more. That evening at the Astor Street house, Giada asked to be taken into the glass room. She sat looking at the tall mirror that had faced the wall for so many years. "Do you know I never told anyone to turn that mirror around?" Elias stood in the middle of the room. "I know. Then who did it?" "I did," he continued slowly, like someone who had rehearsed the sentence for a long time and still found it difficult. "The day they brought you home, I wheeled you in here, and I looked up at that mirror, and I saw myself standing behind that chair. I couldn't look at it. I left it that way for 3 years, and I let the whole house believe it was because of you." Giada held out her hand. "Push me closer." She turned the mirror around herself. It was heavy, and she needed 2 attempts before she managed it, and when it finally faced the room again, the glass reflected a young woman seated in a wheelchair, a man standing behind her, and in the doorway, a woman watching with a bandage around her knee. No one looked away. Years later, whenever people asked Elias Sarno what had made him let go of everything, he always gave the same answer. He said that for half his life, he had believed wealth was measured by what a man could keep behind the gates of his own house. He said he had been wrong. The most valuable thing that had ever walked through those gates arrived in a pair of worn cloth shoes, split open at the toes, with a damaged knee, and never asked him for a single dollar. This story leaves behind a few very simple things. Some wounds don't need money. They only need someone willing to sit down until their eyes are level with yours. Giving something while taking away the receiver's dignity is no longer giving, and people often misunderstand the things they themselves have never had to endure. If today's story touched you, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it so that every day we can continue listening together to more meaningful stories. How do you feel about Marisol, about Giada, and about that man? Please leave a comment, because we truly want to hear the thoughts that come from deep within your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.